Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. You know, there are a lot of stand problems in corn and soybeans across the country this year. We're going to talk about what went wrong this year and what we can do to fix that so it doesn't happen again.
We'll also discuss heading in wheat and what you can do at that stage of the game to help your wheat yield and quality.
We've got a prickly weed of the week that we'll talk about how to control later in the show, but first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk about the Ag PhD Field Day coming up Thursday, July 24th.
Well, there's certainly a lot to see and a lot to do, and the Field Day site has greatly expanded over the last few years as more and more people want to come each summer to see what we're doing, because we're striving for 300 plus bushel corn, 100 plus bushel soybeans, and on the wheat, Brian, would you say 150 bushel wheat is your goal right now?
Well, no, it's not, but high yield wheat, high yield corn, high yield soybeans, that's really what we're after. And this is on our own farm. We invite you to come to this big field day. Last year, we had over 7,000 farmers from around the country attend. And the big thing is, it's a day about learning. It's a day about talking to other farmers. It's a day about seeing new technologies. You know, somewhere you've got to get more information so you can make your farming operation better, and hopefully this is one day that you'll be able to do that.
Well, that's one of the great things here is there are going to be farmers from across the country that'll be at the field day. Last year there were farmers from over 26 states here, and many of those guys are very high yielding and very successful farmers. So you may want to come and hear what Brian and I have to say, but you may just be as interested talking to a lot of the other farmers that are here. There are going to be several farmers raising 400 plus bushel corn that'll be at our field day talking about what they're doing, how they're getting higher yields, and looking for other information they can get from other farmers around the country like yourself.
Yeah, so in addition to all these plots and new technologies we have going on that we do want to show you and kind of go through with you during the day, we have a number of different educational sessions. Some of them include some of these high yield producers that Darren's talking about. We're going to have a high yield corn panel, a high yield soybean panel, a high yield wheat panel, and a number of other things.
Well, the biggest thing for me is Brian needs a lot of education. So we've got the Brian versus Darren plots again this year, where I'll be showing Brian how to raise higher yielding corn and soybeans and wheat, or possibly he'll be beating me in yield. We don't know until we get a little further into the season.
Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. We also have sessions with one of the top estate planning lawyers in the country, one of the top drainage lawyers in the country. We have special guests Richard Petty and Bobby Knight. There are a lot of things going on that day. It's going to be a lot of fun. We also, if you're concerned about the heat, don't get too worried about it. We start early in the morning when it's nice and cool, and we do have a number of air-conditioned tents and an air-conditioned shed as well.
Well, there's certainly a lot to do, a lot to see. There'll be brand new equipment. There'll be some new releases that have not been seen anywhere else yet. It's been a fun thing about the timing of our Ag PhD Field Day is a lot of those new releases happen about this time, so we can show them to you before we get into the farm show season. So you get just a little bit of a heads up on your neighbor on what's coming out that's new and interesting. You also get to ride and drive some of that new equipment right here at the Ag PhD Field Day, so you can test out some of these new things to see if those technologies will work for your farm.
So once again, we invite you to come to the free Ag PhD Field Day on our farm on Thursday, July 24th from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Again, it's a free event. We hope you can make it.
Well, one of the things I can promise you won't see at our Field Day site is our Weed of the Week. I'll show you how to control this tough weed later in the show.
What's next in weed control technology? Roundup Ready 2 Extend soybeans will provide tolerance to dicamba and glyphosate and will be built on the Genuity Roundup Ready to Yield trait. See them in action at extendfollowafield.com.
The math for getting higher yield potentials is simple. 4 is greater than 2. Steiger Rowtrack Series tractors give you proven Case IH Quadtrac technology, helping you cover more acres in less time. And with 4 independent oscillating tracks, you'll also minimize ground pressure and compaction for a better growing environment, all of which adds up to higher potential yields. The world of farming is changing. Be ready with Case IH.
A farmer's attention to detail is what makes the difference. You take the time for service management because you know how vital it is to your operation. You service your field like everything else because soil sampling makes all the difference and gets the results you want. Download the app Soil Test Pro and start grit sampling today. Keep your farm growing strong. The more you test, the more you know.
Wake up, breakfast is served. Your roots crave P. Most of your applied P gets tied up in the soil, a natural phenomenon known as phosphorus fixation. Fix the problem with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Avail makes more P available to your roots, here, here, and here. Increasing P availability can lead to increased P uptake in the plant. That's more P, and more P. More phosphorus for your crop can mean more results in your bin. An average of 9.6 bushels per acre of corn. Breakfast is served. Supercharge your P with Avail.
Looking to maximize yield? Quick Roots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quick Roots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. Quick Roots is applied to the seeds so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your Quick Roots today.
A proven herbicide for decades, dicamba can provide burn-down residual control of tough and resistant weeds for up to 14 days. That's another reason why farmers will use dicamba for years to come. Brought to you by Roundup Ready Plus Weed Management Solutions.
Well, this spring's weather was certainly variable across the country. Some areas were too dry, some were too wet, and many areas saw some stand issues in corn and soybeans.
Well, a lot of the stand issues had to do with cold temperatures, and I guess that's what we wanted to talk about a little bit today. How can you overcome these things so you don't have stand issues again in the future?
Well, when you have perfect conditions for planting, it's warm, the soil is dry, everything's working out just right with your planter, we typically don't see a lot of stand issues. But this year, it seems like everything was wrong. It was either too cold or, worse yet, too cold and too wet, and crop was getting put in. And when you've got the conditions just perfectly set for disease and insect problems, it's no wonder that we have some stand issues out there.
All right, but there are a couple other things going on too. It's also residue management and it's that surface crusting. So how are you going to overcome residue, surface crusting, diseases, and insects? Those are really the four things that we're talking about here. And I got so tired this spring of everybody talking about, oh, the soils are too cold to plant corn. No, they're not. You have to treat your seed right though if it's going to survive in those cold temps. So in other words, you've got to have that residue taken care of. You want to have high organic matter levels and not have surface crusting issues. We can talk about that just a little bit more too. But the big things are, what we did on our farm is we put headline down in furrow on all of our corn seed. We also used Quick Roots and we used insecticide. So if you're doing a fungicide and insecticide in addition to the seed treatment you already have, plus a biological or natural seed treatment like a Quick Roots that's got beneficial bacteria and fungi, then you add extra protection there against diseases, against bugs, and get a little bit extra kick early on. We saw a very noticeable difference where this was done versus where it wasn't done. I think that's a huge thing if you're going forward. And like Darren said, if you're going to plant into warm soils, you got no issues out there whatsoever, it's not nearly as big a deal. But let's face it, when we're in the northern part of the country, every year we're planting into cold, wet soils. Every year. So you got to do something about that so you don't continue to have stand issues going forward.
Well, you may be sitting there listening to this thinking, hold on now. That's going to be really expensive to do all that stuff at planting time, and it certainly is an investment that you'll have to choose to make. But you really need to look at what the return on investment is with these different pieces. Like the headline, for example, in furrow. We tried it a couple years ago on a small amount of acres. Last year we did it on more acres, and it really worked, and we had differing weather conditions, and we thought it worked very well for us. So this year we went ahead.
We knew it worked very well because we had yield gain, and that's what it all comes back to.
So we put it on the whole farm. So we put it on the whole farm this year, and then you look at the different pieces there. Insecticide. We've been using insecticide on our corn plantings really as long as I can remember, but with BT traits, I know there are a number of farmers that have gone away from using insecticide, but when you've got a year like this where the corn is going to have to sit in the ground for a long period of time, it really pays to have some added insecticide on to try and kill a lot of those bugs before they take a bite out of your root system, plus all those bugs like seed corn beetles, seed corn maggots, things that are in the soil that really those BTs aren't going to protect you against. Having additional insecticide insecticide in the furrow is really invaluable on a year like this.
The other thing we haven't talked about yet is in-furrow fertilizer. We advise you to put a little bit of in-furrow fertilizer down, but mix it with some water and use low salt products. If you have too much fertilizer, that actually can hurt you more than it can help you, especially in a year like this one. But if you do have a little bit of fertilizer out there just to help get that plant started, get that young seedling off and growing better, it really does make a difference in a year like this when it is cool early in the spring. So there are all these factors that we want you to take a look at, and that's corn. When we talk about soybeans, it's just a little bit different.
Well, it is a little bit different, but one thing that's constant, Brian, that I should mention before we leave the corn topic is just this. When you have a spring where it's too wet, and if you're in North Dakota, Minnesota, Ohio, I mean, there's just a bunch of different areas where it's way too wet this spring, we've got to have good drainage out in those fields. Now, I understand in North Dakota, that ground was frozen till well into May, so our drain tile wasn't really even running yet.
Yeah, but let's talk about why it was frozen. If you have too much water, then it's going to freeze up hard, and that frost isn't going to come out in the spring. If you've got the water table down, you're going to find your soils warm a lot more quickly.
And yes, getting that water down in the fall is great. We don't have flooding issues in the fall. Then that soil is set to absorb more moisture in the spring.
So in other words, what we're telling you is if you were in an area that was too wet to plant, get some tile in the ground. It's a tremendous investment. Best thing we've ever spent money on our farm. It's a way better every year return than herbicide, than fertilizer, than insecticides. The best thing we've ever invested in on our farm. Let's come back to this surface crusting just a little bit, because that is something that can affect corn and soybeans.
Well, and there's a lot of reasons, and it was interesting. We were just having a discussion off camera about some strip till that we had done that had a little bit of crusting, but nothing like we're seeing.
But let's talk about
why.
Why.
Heavy conventional tillage.
Right, and let's talk about why. This is some new ground that we picked up that has low organic matter levels, and that's a big problem. If you've got low organic matter on your farm, you're more prone to have crusting issues. So over time, what do you want to do? You want to build up the organic matter levels. That means reducing tillage and planting high residue crops like corn and wheat.
Well, it's another thing too where gypsum is a soil amendment, or you could look at it as a nutritional supplement to your soils. But in this case, when we talk about soil crusting, I look at gypsum as a soil
calcium
amendment
in general
that helps reduce that crusting potential for you.
Yep, either gypsum or lime, just get some more calcium out there. The whole thing is we want to have a higher concentration of calcium, a lower concentration of magnesium, and you're less likely to have that soil crusting issue.
Okay, now you talked about residue management. We saw a lot of issues with that this year. If you had corn stalks and you rotated to soybeans, and there were quite a few acres across the country shifting from corn over to soybeans, we had a lot of residue to deal with, and we had a cool and in many cases wet spring. It's tough to get that residue to move around, to get it chopped up properly, and so we saw some issues with hairpinning. We also saw some issues where that residue covered over the row. It blew over later because of a lot of the wind that we had this spring, and we had some seed that just couldn't push through all that residue. So getting residue managed properly is important. For us, we think here again is where a chopping corn head comes into play, and being aggressive with those residue managers on your planter to get that residue out of the way.
So what we're saying is we really encourage you to use a chopping corn head. It's something that we used to not have a chopping corn head on our farm in no-till or in strip-till. There's no way that I'm going back to that in the future. We've got to have the chopping corn head out there. It makes it so much better dealing with the residue the following spring. We have a lot less hairpinning of residue. We have a lot better stands. Residue management is dramatically improved when you use that chopping corn head.
You know, with soybeans, we talk about the in-furrow and seed treatment piece, and definitely this year the fungicides on the seed treatment paid back big returns. We saw a lot of issues with Pythium, with guys that were trying to get away from using fungicides that thought, I don't want to spend all that money this year. I'm just going to cut my costs here. Maybe I'll just use some inoculant. And while inoculant's fine, I'm not encouraging you to go away from that. You definitely need to have that fungicide piece as well. And I believe this year the insecticide is going to prove, when we get some yield data back on trials where there was Poncho, Gaucho, Cruiser used versus none, I think that's going to pay some big dividends too. We saw a lot of early issues with wireworm.
Well, once again, there were a lot of stand issues this year, and I realize they were because of the cold, wet conditions. But all we're trying to say is we're going to have cold, wet conditions again in the future. So either you can get prepared and do some of these extra things, fungicide, insecticide, biological seed treatments, manage that residue a little bit better, use some in-furrow fertilizer, or delay your planting. You've got two choices there. But when you go out and continue to do the same thing you've done in the past, you're going to continue to have the issues you've had in the past, and it does come down to standards. Certainly there are variety differences and everything else, but let's face it, I don't care what variety you've got. If you treat that seed better, you manage the residue better, you get some fertilizer in there, you've got a lot better chance to have a great stand, whether it's corn or soybeans or any crop you've got.
And of course, weed control is another critical component to having a successful crop. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed later in the show.
Can I grow my crop without the expense of fertilizer additives?
You can. Conditions forcing you to make some tough choices? Choose agricultural liquid fertilizers and you won't need stabilizers or nutrient managers, eliminating expense and hassle. Millions of acres and years of replicated research have proven that with ProGerminator, SureK, High Energy and MicroLink, you can grow a great crop without costly additives. To learn more and find a dealer near you, visit agroliquid.com.
You can put more bushels in your bin without expanding the farm with YieldTrack. The new 24-row planter from Titan Machinery features the Case IH Early Riser planting system. YieldTrack will take you to the field first with extra flotation come spring. The tracks eliminate pinched rows and reduce compaction. All 22 and 30-inch YieldTracks come loaded with Case IH technology, including cable drive and AccuRow. Grab more bushels from every acre with YieldTrack from Titan Machinery.
If you could see how nitrogen loss causes yield loss, you'd fix it. So fix it right, with the stabilizer proven to reduce all 3 ways nitrogen escapes. Nutrisphere N Nitrogen Fertilizer Manager. It keeps nitrogen in a more readily available form longer. With today's market and environment, it's a high priority to keep your nitrogen on track. To higher yield with Nutrisphere N.
Get the most from the genetic potential in your crops, reduce plant stress, and increase yield. BioForge upregulates key genes to keep roots growing and reduce ethylene for improved plant stress tolerance. BioForge mixes well with other products for easy application with every pass through the field. BioForge, progressive growers' choice to improve root growth, reduce crop stress, and increase yield. Make every growing day count with BioForge from Stoller, USA.
If you watch Ag PhD TV, you'll love the new Ag PhD radio show each weekday on Rural Radio Sirius XM Channel 80. This is Darren Hefty. On the new Ag PhD radio program, we'll take live callers and provide the agronomic information and brotherly banter you've come to expect from Ag PhD. We'll feature a Back 40 segment where we talk to farmers and agronomists around the country to share what's going on with crop production. And it wouldn't be Ag PhD without addressing a pest of the day. Tune in to the Ag PhD radio show each weekday at 2 p.m. Central on Rural Radio Sirius XM Channel 80.
Once it gets late in the season in wheat, there's not nearly as much you can do to make your yields great, but there are a couple of things you might want to consider if you want high yield and good quality.
Well, especially when we get to heading, there are just not as many things that you can do, but there's a couple key diseases when we talk about head scab and also about late season rusts that we have to be concerned about. And then we look at just that protein component when we're talking about wheat where you can get a protein bonus. What can you do to influence that and how can you get nitrogen out there?
Yeah, and don't forget about late season insects as well. So here's what we want you to consider. Spray at heading timing with a fungicide. Now, if you want to just go with the cheap option, Aureus is $2 an acre. Okay, that's generic Folicure. Just a few years ago, that cost $15 an acre. Now it's $2. Very inexpensive. Going to be excellent on rust, just not nearly as good on Fusarium head blight or head scab.
There's nothing wrong with it. And that's the thing. You say, well, wait a minute, it dropped from $15 to $2.
Yeah,
Maybe there's a resistance issue or something else.
Yeah, what's wrong with it is you've got Prosaro and you have Caramba out there that are much better on head scab. So that's what's wrong with it.
Well, there's nothing wrong. What I'm saying is that the Aureus or generic Folicure, it hasn't changed at all. It's still highly effective on many of the rusts. It's still okay on scab control. And if you're in an area where you say, man, I'm just really not worried about scab this year, but I am concerned about stripe rust or something else coming in late, here's a cheap option. And if you do have a low infestation of head scab, that Aureus may be enough for you.
All right, so when you're out there spraying that fungicide, we encourage you to scout for insects. And if you're finding harmful insects, grasshoppers, aphids, number of other problem bugs that you can have in wheat, spray. It costs $1.50 to $2 an acre to get an inexpensive pyrethroid-like silencer. That's it. You're going to invest $2 an acre in Aureus, $2 an acre in silencers. So you got $4 an acre. You can get diseases and insects. So I'm not saying just go spray if you have absolutely no bugs out there, but I am telling you, have some insecticide along. So when you're out there spraying anyway, you just get off the sprayer, check a little bit. If you got some harmful insects, kill them. It's not too tough.
We're typically targeting 10 to 15% flowering. That head has to be out if you want to protect it. It needs to be a little bit along the ways in the flowering process so it's opened up so we can get some protection around the head. The other thing at this time that we think about is just how much protein is going to be in that wheat.
Right, and the whole key here is having late season nitrogen available. Now there are a number of different ways that you can get that out there. There's some people who will foliar apply nitrogen. You'll burn the crop a little bit, but you absolutely will increase your protein levels. You can certainly stream bar on some nitrogen fairly late in the year as long as you get a rain to get that nitrogen into the ground and into the plant. That's another way to go. If you had built your organic matter levels over the last few years to let's say 5 or 6%, for every 1% of organic matter you have in your soil, you're going to get 20 to 30 pounds of free nitrogen every year for your crop. If you had 5% organic matter, that's 100 to 150 pounds of nitrogen that's going to come available at some point during the year, usually kind of late in the season, right when your crop needs it to make protein. Now, here's the question. Can I mix fertilizer, fungicide, and insecticide all in the same tank? Now there are people who have done it, but it's going to get pretty hot. So I would discourage you from doing that on very many acres till you've done it on a few acres to feel confident that you're not going to hurt your wheat. Because anytime you put fertilizer together with something else, it gets hot, but especially when it's together with a fungicide like a triazole product, Aureus or Folicure especially, it's hot.
I wouldn't either. I don't like that three-way mix. It gets too hot too often for my taste. But the other thing that I was just going to caution you on is this. You've got to be out there before that disease hits. So remember, we got to protect the flag leaf. That's the most important thing when it comes to disease. Now obviously head scab is a separate issue, but we've got to protect that flag leaf. Get that disease protection out when you need to.
However, keep in mind that fungicides aren't going to move in the plant, so your flag leaf fungicide is not going to do you any good at heading.
One other issue you'll need to take care of in advance is weed control. You don't want to let it go this long in wheat, but we'll show you how to stop this weed coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is sponsored by the Enlist Weed Control System from Dow AgroSciences, a new herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate.
Farming always looks forward. Introducing the Enlist Weed Control System, an advanced herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate for exceptional control of tough weeds. The next chapter begins.
Our Weed of the Week is our old friend, Buffalobur. Brian, you used to love this weed.
Yeah, and I used to love pulling it as long as I pulled it way down at the base.
Brian was my hero.
Gloves.
If we were out walking soybeans, and if there got to be a weed that was too big, well, Brian's a few years older than me, I'd say, hey, big brother, come over here and pull this big weed. And he liked to show off his muscles, so he'd come over and pull this big weed out. So when I had a Buffalobur, I'd say, hey, yeah, there's a weed. It's about 5 feet back from me. Come over and pull that thing. And it was Buffalobur almost every time. He got wise to me pretty quick. But even with leather gloves, those little spikes up the stems on Buffalobur can really get you.
Yep, they can. And here's the whole thing. It used to be a difficult to control weed. We didn't have a lot of good options. I remember Blazer was probably the best thing there was. Well, today you can't even find straight Blazer. You can find Ultra Blazer, but that's not real common. Cobra has some activity. But the good news is we have a lot more options today. Roundup certainly is excellent on Buffalobur, especially when you get it when it's relatively small.
Well, when it's an annual weed and Roundup still controls it, we don't have a lot of issues with it. But it is still one you don't want to have out there. You don't want to have it in your pasture. You don't want to have it in your row crop fields either. So start with a good pre. Like in corn, I like Verdict. It's got some burn down activity. I also like anything that has balanced flex in it, that has good burn down and also good residual.
Post-emergent corn status I think is the best, but Callisto, Loudus, Impact, Armazon, they all have activity on it, especially when you throw just a little atrazine with it. Let's go to the tougher crop. Go to soybeans. I've always liked Sencor. It's always had some activity. It's just not going to be perfect.
Yeah, my favorite has been Authority MTZ because then you got two different products with activity on it. And also if you happen to throw in one of the yellows like a Treflan, Sonalan, or Prowl, they are maybe 50% control, but
see, I don't think they're going to give you near that.
When you add that into the other products, you're going to do well.
Right, exactly. When you have that Authority MTZ out there, you pretty much have it under control. Post-emerge, yeah, there's nothing that's real great. Cobra's probably the best, but Roundup is going to be excellent on Buffalobur.
Yeah, I've always thought Pursuit and Raptor have a little bit of activity on it.
Yeah.
And you mix in a Flex Star or Cobra with them, and they're not too bad. Just don't let Buffalobur get big, otherwise it gets really difficult.
All right, in wheat, I'd suggest sharpen down, follow post-emerge with Husky, and Buffalobur shouldn't be a problem on your farm.
That's all the time we have for this week's weed, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
What are farmers doing to feed the planet? They're using Quadtrek technology, soil management, and planting systems from Case IH to foster a better growing environment that maximizes yield potential. Visit caseih.com to be ready.
How do you use a flat fan nozzle to broadcast apply pesticides safely and accurately even later on in crops? We'll explain in today's Iron Talk. First, the basics. Flat fan nozzles are still the best ones to use for spray coverage. Like anything else, you have to set things up correctly to get the optimum performance in the field without streaks or misapplication. Flat fan nozzles create an inverted V-shaped pattern as the droplets come out of the nozzle. The edges of that pattern have a lower spray volume, while the middle of the pattern has a higher volume. To obtain uniform coverage across the pattern, you have to overlap the spray droplets from one tip to the next. By spacing the nozzles at the proper distance between each other on the boom and regulating the boom height accurately, you can get the same volume of spray across the width of your boom. Manufacturers vary the overlap needed for different models of spray tips from 30% to 100%, so check with the manufacturer's information to see exactly how much overlap you need for your specific tips. The boom height is also critical, especially as we get later in the season and the crops get taller. With most spray tips, you need to be at least 18 inches above the crop, otherwise you end up with a distorted spray pattern and potentially streaks or injured crops. As crop heights vary at this time of year, boom height adjustment from the spray cab is a great feature to have. Flat fan nozzles can be a great tool for your farm when used properly. Watch your nozzle spacing and boom height and use the spray pressure that's appropriate for your product and the tip. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
Dirty work pays. That is if your dirty work includes a Soil Max Gold Digger tile plow. Soil Max tile plows feature zero deflection technology. With the only tile plow factory paired with Ag Leader's IntelliSlope control system, you eliminate the need for grade calculations and lasers. So make your next investment in a Soil Max Gold Digger. Better yield, longer planting and harvest windows, better water management is all yours with Soil Max. Visit soilmax.com.
Capello corn headers are designed for producers who expect more. Expect more grain in your bin. Expect an industry-leading 2-year manufacturer's warranty. Expect Capello-designed chopping and folding options that save you time and money. And whether red, green, or yellow, expect row size options that fit your operation because all producers deserve the best. Expect Capello. It's a head above the rest.
The Case IH Spring Sales Event is on now, making it a great time to get the equipment you need for this season. With 0% financing for 60 months on all Farmall and Maxim Series tractors, as well as our complete line of hay tools, you can turn everyday chores into everyday savings. But hurry, the Spring Sales Event ends June 30th, 2014. For more information, ask your local Case IH dealer or go to caseih.com/special offers.
A farmer's attention to detail is what makes the difference. You take the time for service management because you know how vital it is to your operation. You service your field like everything else because soil sampling makes all the difference and gets the results you want. Download the app Soil Test Pro and start grid sampling today. Keep your farm growing strong. The more you test, the more you know.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
The all-new S-Cube commercial tender is the only tender on the market with poly tanks, giving you the capability to haul seed, fertilizer, water, or liquid fertilizer. Each cube can hold 300 units of seed, 2,000 gallons of liquid, or 300 cubic feet of fertilizer. Options include full functioning wireless remote, stainless steel conveyors, and self-contained hydraulics. Get yours today at Norwood Sales.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but for more agronomic information, be sure to tune into Ag PhD Radio at 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Eastern each weekday on Sirius XM Channel 80. That's the Rural Radio channel.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV, where we have a Weed of the Week, a Farm Basics Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
Can you increase your field's topsoil layer by reducing tillage, planting high residue crops, utilizing cover crops, and adding manure to the soil? Topsoil can be rebuilt. For more information, visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org.